Hey everybody, it's another beautiful day in sunny California. It's probably like, gotta be in the low 60s right now, warm enough to where I'm not even gonna wear my chaps. Anyway, today I think I want to talk about suspension. So I'm gonna hop on the bike, head to work, and let's talk. Okay, did you see the way that kid was looking at me? That was pretty funny. He like looked over because he heard the bike, and then I think he realized I had a camera on my helmet, and he was like, "What the hell?" It was pretty funny. I've been getting that a lot lately. Alright, so as promised, let's talk a little bit about suspension. Now this kind of goes along with the other video that I did in regards to knowing your bike and knowing what it can do. This will kind of tie into that, because the suspension of your bike, I think, is one of the most important things, yet one of the most overlooked items. And even if you have a stock suspension, this is something that I would recommend you look into. This also applies to pretty much every motorcycle, maybe with the exception of some bigger touring bikes with a more basic suspension. But I don't care if you're riding a sport bike, a sport touring bike, a cruiser, what brand it is, it doesn't matter. The same rules apply. So on my bike, when it was stock, the only thing that I could do was adjust my preload in the back. And I think for the most part, majority motorcycles today are going to have some sort of preload adjustment on the rear. I think the more sophisticated bikes will have more adjustments up front, probably also a preload. And then the more racy or upscale bikes, you know, maybe like a S model or an R model, those will have even more adjustments. Yeah, freaking traffic today, man. This is what happens when I leave late. Let's see what time it is. 7:31. So I'm supposed to be at work 7:30. And it takes me a half hour to get there. Well, give or take. Right, with traffic like this, it'll probably take me 40 minutes. But I'll split. Probably get there in 30. So anyway, back to the suspension. Setting your preload, or which is going to set your sag, is very important. And especially when you're doing stuff like I do, where you're running your bike pretty hard and you're splitting lanes. Real quick, you see this truck in front of me? You see how he got over? I want to make a note that when you're splitting lanes, you can't always trust that the person in front of you is moving over to let you by. Because a lot of cars, I shouldn't say a lot, because it's not a lot, it's like 20% of the time, a car will see you and he'll move over to give you more room. But that's not to be mistaken for a guy that's not paying attention and just happened to go way far over because he wasn't paying attention. You got to watch out for that. You can't always trust that the person saw you and moved over for you. And that was a perfect example of that, because I think the guy just wasn't paying attention. He moved over far left, had his left side front and rear tires hitting the bumps on the left, which gave me a ton of room to get by. I didn't take that window because I didn't think that guy saw me. I assumed that he just wasn't paying attention to driving, and that's why that happened. And I think I was right, because shortly after that happened, he moved back over. back to suspension. Don't even remember where I left off. What I'm trying to get at with suspension is setting your sag. I think is the last point we were talking about. If you do that, it will transform your bike. I guarantee it. Unless on the off chance it's already set for your weight and whatever weight that you have on the bike. Chances are it's not, but it could be. And if it is, and you're like, oh, I set it, and really, you know, it was already set, you're not going to notice a difference. Or if it was very, very close to begin with, and you made a small change, you might not notice that. But chances are it's not set correctly if you've never touched it, and you're going to want to do that. If your bike has the ability to change the front, you're going to want to do that as well. Now my bike, like I said when I got it, I had stock suspension, and my rear was not set. When I bought this bike, I weighed probably about maybe a little over 200 pounds. I was probably like 210, 215. And the suspension on this bike, it just wasn't going to happen. It was very clear and evident that the stock suspension is meant for a lower weight rider, right? Let alone if you're riding 2-up. And then remember, all your gear adds to that, right? Your helmet, your jacket, your boots, your clothes. If you're wearing overpants or chaps, if you have saddlebags and that was an add-on, that's not something the dealer is going to, or the manufacturer is going to take into consideration. Plus whatever gear or items you have in your saddlebags, all of that stuff adds up. And you might think, oh, you know, oh, my jeans weigh, you know, maybe half a pound. I don't know, I've never weighed jeans. They don't weigh that much though. But all these small items add up. And that's why typically if you were to look at how do I set my sag on my bike, they're going to tell you put all your gear on, or put all your gear on your bike and then sit on it to properly set your sag. Again, all that stuff adds up. So with this bike, with the Dyna, I tried to do that, and I had my preload settings pretty much maxed out, and it wasn't enough. And I did some searching, and really it's, at the end of the day, it was, well, sorry, I had to pay attention there. I did some searching, and basically what I found was tough shit. That's Dyna suspension, you know. And at that point, it's I upgrade my suspension or I lose a bunch of weight. So I upgraded the suspension. I went with Terry Cable rear shocks, and this was years ago. And Terry Cable, he set them up for me. You know, he's a great guy, awesome guy, super knowledgeable, super friendly, very, very customer service oriented, just all around awesome dude. And I met him at Street Vibrations over in Nevada, and he had a booth set up, and he had a bunch of shocks, a bunch of springs, and he was doing, if you bought a set of his shocks, he was doing free installation, free setup. And I decided to do it. My bike was there. I was already planning to buy suspension anyways, and after I talked to Terry Cable for probably like 30 minutes, and he sold me on his shocks, and he had other manufacturers and other brands, so he had a set of progressives there, multiple sets of progressives to show the difference between them. And then he had his shock set up to show, here's how the progressives act, here's how mine acts. And I had talked to him about other brands that he didn't have on display, like works or Olin's. And the coolest thing, alright, I'm gonna shut up for a bit so I can split these guys. Getting over from the left to the right. Ooh, you see that guy? Almost took me out. Back on the topic of suspension. I think where I left off was talking about Terry Cable and having him set up my shocks, and I was talking to him at the event, and I had asked him about different brands. Specifically, I asked him about Works and Olin's. And one of the key things that stood out to me was Terry, he didn't knock those brands. He promoted them. You know, he was very upfront and said both of these companies make a great shock. And he said you can't go wrong with either of them. And that was big to me, because he's the owner of a company, and he's the manufacturer of his own shock, and he's promoting another brand. And the way it sounded was like he knew some of the guys at some of these other manufacturers, and you know, he didn't say anything bad about them. And like I said, he didn't promote them and say, oh yeah, you should totally go out and buy those over mine. It wasn't like that. It was more like, you know, do your research on your own, but both of these guys make an awesome shock, and I think you'd be happy with either one. And that was big for me. And I ended up buying his shocks. He offered a discount at the event. I think it was like $100 off. And he set them up for me. So I wheeled my bike over to his booth. You know, he jacked it up. We pulled my bags off, pulled the old shocks off, put his on, and he ended up swapping the springs on the shocks because they weren't set up right. And so, you know, he asked me a ton of questions, which is also real big. You know, what type of riding do you do? Do you ride 2-up? Are you mostly solo? How much do you weigh? How much does your passenger weigh? And based on all this information, he was able to, and he wrote all of this down. He had a little notebook, he wrote it all down, he did some math, and he came up with a spring combination that he thought would work best for me. He swapped the springs on the shocks, and then he set my sag for me. Now, that was big, and I will tell you, the bike was transformed after that. It was like night and day difference. And here's the kicker for Terry Cable, and this is why I would promote Terry Cable, and this is why I think he is one of the best in the business. About 8 months after I had purchased his shocks, I realized that number one, I'm not riding 2-up as much as I said that I was going to, and number two, I lost a bunch of weight, and I had noticed the suspension was stiff, and so I called Terry Cable's shop, and I explained this to him. And I said, look man, this is what's going on. The spring, I think the springs are oversprung for my weight now, and I'm not riding 2-up as much as I said I was. And you know, I wanted to either bring my bike down, or, you know, and I told him this. I said, you know, he's in California, he's far away from me, but you know, I'd make the ride. And I said, you know, I can come to you. I can mail you my shocks. You know, whatever we need to do. You know, I just want to fix it. And I was fully expecting to have to pay for this. And Terry Cable said, I'm just gonna mail you a new spring. And that was, again, you know, the dude is awesome. No charge. Almost a year after I had purchased his suspension, and at no fault of his, you know, he mails me a spring. And I thought that was real big, you know, and maybe a lot of people wouldn't know how to change that. But I changed it on my bike. He has different weight springs, and he can mix and match them to reach, you know, a specific goal. And I think I'd have to go back and look, but I think one side is on my bike, one side's a 125 and the other side's a 150, and I think the one I pulled off was a 175, and that's like pound springs, you know, 175 pound spring. But that was a big deal for me. The other thing that Terry did was, I had you know, one of the things he asked me to do was, when I bought the suspension, he said, I want you to call me when you get home, and I want you to tell me what you think. Because he knew I was going to ride 500 miles home. So I did. I called him and I said, your suspension is awesome. It was night and day difference. It was really good. And I tell him, one of the things I don't like is having the rear set up the way it should be really made the front stick out. Jesus, what the hell is this guy doing? Having the rear set up proper and, you know, pretty much spot on perfect made me realize how bad the front suspension was on the bike. And I told him that. And his response to me was, I have a fix for you. Because I have dampening rods that I've developed and I've created for this exact complaint that you're having. And I go, oh, well, sweet. How much do these cost? Like I'm a firm believer in your suspension. If you're telling me you have a fix for my complaint, you know, I want to implement it. And he sent them to me for free. And not only did he send them to me for free, he spent about 45 minutes on the phone with me telling me how to swap these things out, telling me tips and tricks and ways to do it without pulling the, you know, the fork legs off and without having to take the whole fork apart. And then, you know, he gave me oil weight recommendations. So, you know, I can't say enough good things about Terry Cable. I think he makes an awesome product. I think he's, again, best in the business customer service wise, and I would highly recommend him. Anyway, that's it for now. We'll continue this later.